Welcome back. My guest now is Rachel James, and she has had some very personal upfront experience with advanced directives. Rachel, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to honor and acknowledge the fact that you're going to be giving birth in 2 months?
It's very soon, yes. 2 months.
Well, I'm glad the baby's on the set too. So one of the things the pieces that you can bring to this conversation on death, well actually there's 2 or 3, but I think I'll just ask you to let us know how you came to this whole notion of being involved with death and dying.
Okay, well, I'm a writer and a lecturer. I used to focus mostly in history, bizarre history and unusual things specifically, and I had a keen interest in the more morbid side of things. That, like many people who are interested in that stuff, came from childhood experience with death. And my particular very vivid thing was not being allowed to go to a cousin's funeral because I was too young. And I remember being very upset that I was not allowed to participate in that ritual. So, about 2 years ago, I was asked by Doherty, who is the founder of an organization called In the Order of the Good Death, to speak at a lecture salon about a death-related subject, because so much of my work revolved around weird deaths in history, plagues and things like the molasses disaster of 1919.
Well, I don't know about that.
We won't have time for it, but it's very interesting.
Okay.
Many died.
Go look that up. Molasses disaster.
Yeah. It was a sticky death. And I kind of tend to, my work tends to be pithy and humorous and kind of keep things light, but it is all based on morbid stuff. So basically, Doherty, who is a mortician in Los Angeles, who does a YouTube video series called Ask a Mortician, is kind of spearheading this movement of death-related talks and internet videos and conversations to get, as many have said before me, the idea of a good death out in the open and have these conversations be less fearful and more open.
So Caitlin Doherty has recently, in the last few years, gotten a lot of actual mainstream media coverage, which is excellent, bringing this conversation forward from someone who's working within the funeral industry.
Yes.
And she's shaking it up.
Yes, she is.
There are, tried and true old-time morticians who don't really care for her style.
Yeah, she's gotten a lot of not very nice things said about her from the old school industry professionals, and I think, in my opinion, none of it has a lot of merit, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the direction she's taking this movement is in a less financially viable direction for the industry. That's my opinion, because usually the criticism is that she's a hipster and that she doesn't know what she's talking about, and a lot of her appearance is being criticized, but not really anything she's actually saying.
Right.
Which is that it doesn't need to cost $10,000 to put our loved ones.
So she's doing a lot of education in a really good way. I mean, bringing this whole conversation to YouTube and her brilliant video series is just, that's great. But the organization that she started, Order of the Good Death, is actually an organization for morticians and people who are in the industry. Is that correct?
It's not just people who are in the practical industry, but absolutely. There's people who are running eco-funeral homes. There are people fashion designers who are creating garments that break down with the body. There are researchers who are looking at ways to take energy from crematoriums and use that energy and recycle it. There's also people like me who are just researchers and writers and artists who are just focusing in that area and getting the conversation going. So it's everywhere from the practical to the philosophical side. And she's got us all kind of grouped in a way to where we can be showcased and have these conversations and have them mostly on the internet, in a forum that we have now, that's so widespread, to kind of allow this movement to happen in a way that 20, 30 years ago it wasn't able.
Oh, not in the least. and I think that that is reflective of how this culture is finally, at least in some small part, breaking those cultural shackles of the taboo of even talking about death, let alone having good rituals around it or understanding, the care of the body if you're going to have that body at home for those 3 days. I mean, there's some just hands-on practical knowledge that must be shared and is beginning to be shared.
Well, when you treat death like a taboo and something that you can't talk about, you only know what's in your small little circle, and I think that's the difference between the baby boomers and my generation, is that we're a global community. We're able to experience other people's cultures and other people's grieving, and we see a lot more death. I think in the beginning of the internet boom, people were concerned about that, about people having access to all this information, but it has absolutely revolutionized the way we do everything, obviously, but death as well. We are seeing other religions, we are seeing other customs, and so we are becoming much more curious, much more open to talking about it and seeing that there are a lot more options than being born and living and dying in the same place.
I'd like to go back just for a moment and just touch on some of the previous, like the 1918 influenza epidemic, and some of these other, which would be a whole conversation you and I could have, different show. But the notion, say in this particular county, the population is about 100,000. And if we had 10% of that population taken out by a virus, for instance, just what in the deuce would you do with 10,000 dead bodies in a week?
Well, we'd sure be having conversations about it all of a sudden. It wouldn't be taboo.
Exactly.
I don't know really, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we have gotten a big separation from because of just medical advances and all that. We haven't seen anything like that in America in a long time. I mean, Hurricane Katrina is a good example of us having no idea what to do in that situation. As far as the work that we do and what we would do in that situation, I have no idea. I don't think that we're prepared for it.
Not in the least. And then those kinds of scenarios over the next decade or so are probably going to be occurring.
Well,
so
I don't think people believe that. I think
don't,
there's enough distance between us and that being a normal occurrence in society that they generally people can't wrap their brains around that fact. But again, that's something that has been touched on more than once today, is that death is just as natural as life. It's just as it's going to happen to every single one of us sooner or later.
And how would we like to choose that death to be so that it can be a good death?
Well,
if at all possible.
Yes, and that's what the advanced directive is about, and all these conversations as well. We are scared of death because we don't have control over it. But we do. We do have control of our deaths in a lot of ways. That is, if we talk about it, we will discover that we have all kinds of control.
Before we wrap up, I would like to get on to the advanced directive notion. I know that there are some interesting ways that people can do their advanced directives. There's a lot of information out there, but sometimes finding just the right advanced directive for your circumstance.
Yes, you'd be surprised at how many options there are. Now, 6 months ago, I had to practice what I preached about the being open to talking about and not fearing death when I not only found out I was pregnant, I also got a cancer diagnosis. That changed my work considerably. It stopped being theoretical, and I'm in remission, by the way, so I'm fine. But it did force me to start doing the things that I needed to be doing, that I am telling everyone else to do, and that is to get an advance directive and get my death planned. There are several ways to do this. There are very basic advanced directives, and there are very complicated ones. If you go online, I can provide links for anyone who needs them. There are also no press books that are available. There is an amazing website by a woman who is in the order with me, who's after being widowed in 2009, very young, and she was stuck with all of her husband's stuff not being taken care of. She started a website called, pardon my language, getyourshittogether.org. And it has every single thing you could possibly need to have all of your affairs in order. There are, like I said, less, more specifically bad languaged organizations. There's the caring, wecare.org, I believe, that has advanced directives for every single state. You can control everything from whether they pull the plug to when they pull the plug to how you want to be buried, where if you want to die at home, who you want there, to even into mental health, or if you are declared in some way unable to make your own decisions, you can make all those decisions ahead of time and have an advocate. Everything from whether you are restrained, if you're psychotic. I mean, you can control so much of it if you already have that paperwork in line. And there's tons of no press books, tons of websites out there that can help you along.
Well, those websites will be included at the end of the show. I'll have to have a long roll of all this information,
there's a
because
lot of them.
There are some really good resources out there.
But it's so worth it. I mean, as someone who just had to consider the fact that maybe I'm not going to live till 90 and that I have children to worry about, it was an uncomfortable process, but it was not difficult, and it's a huge peace of mind, a very big weight lifted off of me, that I know that's tucked away and taken care of.
Well, I've had my 5 wishes form sitting on my desk for about 3 years, so maybe I better get my shit together and get it filled out. Well, I would love, Rachel, for you and I to have an extended conversation where we could go to some of these other really interesting bits and pieces, and perhaps in the future we'll be able to do that. But for today, I'm so pleased that you were able to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. So, yes, order of the good death. We'd all like to have a good death. We'll be back with our next guests in a moment.